It happened during a quiet afternoon, one of those moments when the world feels still, and you let yourself believe, just for a second, that the madness might be over. Then came the knock. I opened the door and found two uniformed officers standing on my porch, serious faced and expectant. Behind them, arms folded and wearing the world's most satisfied smirk, stood Karen, clipboard in hand, lips twitching with victory. She looked like a villain in the third act of a soap opera, dramatic, ridiculous, but dangerous. "Sir, we receive a report of a disturbance," one of the officers said. I raised an eyebrow, shifting my weight casually to one side. My tone? Cool as the breeze cutting through the trees behind them. "Wait, you called 911 because I wouldn't let you into my own house?" There was a beat of silence. Then, right on cue, Karen stepped forward with righteous fury burning in her eyes. "This is HOA property," she barked, stabbing at her clipboard like it was a holy relic. The officers exchanged an awkward glance, like two people silently wondering how they'd ended up in this episode of suburban madness. Freeze frame. Yep, that's me, the guy whose private well HOA Karen tapped into to illegally water her garden. And what did I do? Oh, I flushed her entire irrigation system with sewage. And that, dear viewer, that was just the beginning. It all began about a month before the 911 stunt, back when Karen was still new to the throne. She had just taken over as president of the Highland View HOA, a position she inherited after the previous president retired early, a retirement that, according to whispers, wasn't exactly voluntary. At first glance, Karen seemed harmless, polished, overeager, the kind of suburban leader who believed professionalism meant dressing like she was running for office and carrying a clipboard like it was a gavel. She spoke in sugary tones about neighborhood beautification, property value, and preserving the aesthetic standard. But underneath all that gloss and charm was something else, something colder. She didn't just quote the HOA handbook. She wielded it, twisted it, made it her own personal sword. If Karen decided your roses were too red or your fence too tall, suddenly the handbook agreed with her. It didn't matter if the rule didn't exist or if your house wasn't even within HOA boundaries. Karen would still insist applied. The first time I saw her in action, I was sipping coffee on my porch when a landscaping crew rolled up and started tearing out shrubs near my property line. I walked over, curious but calm. "Morning," I said. "What's going on here?" One of the workers, clearly uncomfortable, shrugged. "We were hired by the HOA. Said it was part of the neighborhood improvement project." I laughed. "This area? That's outside the HOA. Always has been. Clearly Mark, see?" They glanced at each other and kept working. And then, like clockwork, Karen arrived, heels clicking on concrete, clipboard cradled in the crook of her arm like it contained the 10 Commandments. "The board voted to include all visible property in the new maintenance plan," she said sweetly. "Visible doesn't mean yours, Karen." I replied, "This is private property." She smiled that tight, unsettling smile. "You'll thank me when you see how much better it looks." That was the first time I felt it. That creeping sense that Karen didn't see boundaries, just obstacles. And she didn't take no for an answer. By the following week, Karen had become a permanent fixture in Highland View, more persistent than the morning paper, and a whole lot less welcome. I'd see her pacing up and down the sidewalks, peering into yards like a nosy neighbor from a sitcom that never got funny. She carried her clipboard like it was bonded to her wrist, always scribbling notes, always watching. It wasn't surveillance. It was strategy. Then it happened. She knocked on my door, clipboard in one hand. Smile stretched taut across her face like a mask made of sunshine and pressure. She greeted me with fake cheer. "Hi. I just wanted to ask if you'd be willing to host next month's HOA meeting at your house." I blinked. "Excuse me?" "Well," she chirped, "we're looking for a home that really showcases the spirit of Highland View. And yours is just so spacious. It'd be perfect for the community to gather." I crossed my arms. "No, Karen." Her smile didn't waver, but I saw the flicker in her eyes. "Well, the HOA charter does state that." I cut her off. "Nope. My home isn't in the HOA's jurisdiction. Never has been. Your charter doesn't apply here. She paused, just long enough to register that I wasn't going to play along. Then the mask slipped back into place. Of course. I just thought you might like the opportunity to contribute. I'm good, thanks. I closed the door. That should have been it. But Karen didn't like the word no. It didn't compute. And when people like her hear it, they don't walk away. They scheme. A few days later, an official-looking notice appeared taped to my door. The HOA seal, probably designed in Canva by Karen herself, was stamped right on the top. It claimed that my property had been voluntarily incorporated into the HOA boundaries and was now subject to all board decisions. Voluntarily, as in I volunteered. I stared at the notice for a full minute, equal parts amused and amazed. Then I called Karen. "Oh, hi," she said, her voice sticky sweet. "Karen," I said, "what the hell is this?" "The board reviewed your situation," she replied calmly, "and decided your home is now part of the community association. It's only fair. You benefit from the neighborhood. After all, I don't think a few hedges and a street lamp count as community benefits. We'll let the courts decide," she said smoothly. That was the moment I realized Karen wasn't just power-hungry. She was delusional, and unfortunately for her, I was done playing nice. Karen didn't storm the castle with torches and pitchforks. She came armed with memos, phone calls, and relentless cheerfulness that grated like nails on a chalkboard. The first memo arrived 2 days after our phone call. Official letterhead. Stiff language. The kind of passive-aggressive politeness that makes your eye twitch. As a valued member of our vibrant community, your cooperation in hosting this month's HOA meeting would be greatly appreciated. I tossed it in the trash. The second one? Same tone, same fake smile in printed form. This time with urgent, underlined 3 times. The third included a suggested floor plan for seating. By the time the 4th memo arrived, my recycling bin had turned into a paper trail of delusion. Then came the calls. Always from a blocked number. Always her voice, upbeat and falsely chipper. "Hi. Just touching base again about the meeting. We're counting on you this Saturday. So excited to see everyone together in your lovely home." She was trying to wear me down, to turn a polite no into a resigned fine, whatever. But she'd picked the wrong guy. I ignored her voicemails, her notes, even the HOA-branded invitation. She slipped under my front door like it was a wedding RSVP. Then Saturday rolled around. I'd nearly forgotten about it, until I glanced out the window and saw her. There she was, standing on my lawn, clipboard clutched. A small crowd gathered behind her. She was pointing toward my house, gesturing animatedly like a realtor giving a tour of a property she didn't own. I walked outside, calm but sharp. "What are you doing, Karen?" She blinked at me, all fake surprise. "Oh, we're just setting up for the meeting." "No, you're not," I replied flatly. "I told you no meeting here." Her expression soured. That phony smile faltered just enough to reveal the steel behind it. "This is HOA property," she snapped. I laughed. I couldn't help it. "Karen, you don't have jurisdiction over my house. I don't care how many clipboards you wave in the air." And that's when she hit red alert. "Fine," she hissed. "Then I'm calling the police." I stared at her. "Wait, what?" "I am. You're obstructing community business." And before I could say another word, she pulled out her phone and dialed. You know what happened next. The squad car rolled up within minutes. Lights off, no sirens. Just quiet authority pulling to the curb. 2 officers stepped out, 1 male, 1 female, both wearing the kind of expression you get when you've seen everything, and are still mildly annoyed to see more. Karen rushed to greet them like a host welcoming dinner guests. Her arms flailed in exaggerated frustration. The clipboard now clutched to her chest like a legal Bible. She's been waiting for this. I muttered to myself. She really thinks this is her moment. The officers walked up the path, calm but alert. One of them gave me a nod. "Sir, we received a call about a civil disturbance." I gestured the crowd, to Karen, and finally to my porch. Apparently, declining to host a meeting in my own home is now a crime. Karen jumped in before I could finish. This is HOA property, she exclaimed, practically shaking with righteous fury. He's obstructing our right to assemble. The officers turned to each other, then back to her. Ma'am, the female officer said gently, you're saying this home belongs to the HOA? Yes, Karen replied confidently. It was incorporated recently. He's just being difficult. I pulled out a neatly folded file from my back pocket. Here are my deed papers, I said, and a zoning map from the county. This property has never been under HOA jurisdiction. Not now, not ever. The male officer took the documents, giving them a once-over. Then he looked at Karen. Do you have anything that shows the HOA has legal authority over this property? Karen fumbled. Clipboard open. Papers shuffled. Vague references to meeting notes and community extension efforts. Nothing even close to binding. The officer handed me back my documents and gave a small shrug. Ma'am, he said flatly, this is a private residence. You can't force someone to host an event. This is an emergency, and it's not something we're here to enforce. Karen looked like she'd been slapped. But this is community business. Then, the female officer replied, you'll want to take it up with a lawyer, not law enforcement. And just like that, they turned and left. No arrests, no warnings. Just two cops who'd seen through the circus in 5 minutes flat. Karen turned toward me, face flushed with fury. You'll regret this, she spat, voice low and venomous. I smiled. You keep saying that. I'm still waiting. She stormed off, her crowd trailing behind her in confused silence. Some looked embarrassed. Others just looked relieved it was over. But I knew better. Karen wasn't done. She'd just lost the battle. Now she'd try to win the war. For a few days, things were quiet. Suspiciously so. The kind of silence that feels like the sky pulling in before a thunderstorm. I knew Karen wasn't finished. She wasn't the kind of person who backed down after being embarrassed. Especially not in public, and definitely not in front of law enforcement. No, Karen was regrouping. Scheming. Loading her next round of nonsense into that overstuffed clipboard of hers. Sure enough, it came. A knock on my door. This time from one of the board members. A nervous man named Grant, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. He handed me a sealed envelope and muttered, she asked me to deliver this, before turning and practically jogging away down my walkway. Inside, a fresh letter on faux official HOA letterhead, complete with a shiny gold seal that looked like it had been printed off a kindergarten certificate template. It claimed that, after extensive review, the HOA had officially extended its jurisdiction to include my home. It cited obscure clauses and updated boundary interpretations and vaguely referenced a majority vote. No signatures. No meeting minutes. No legal reference numbers. I read the whole thing with a slow-growing smirk. She really thinks she can invent a rule and make it stick. I muttered, tossing the letter onto the table. The thing is, I could have ignored it. Legally, it held the same weight as a junk mail coupon. But I knew Karen. She wasn't going to stop until someone made her stop. Ignoring her would only feed the delusion. So I made a call. My friend Mason, a real estate attorney with a no-nonsense personality and a deep personal hatred for HOA overreach, answered on the first ring. I love HOA bullies, he said, practically giddy. They never understand how shallow their power is until someone finally shines a flashlight on it. Send me a copy of her letter. I'll draft something she won't be able to ignore. By the next morning, I had it. 3 pages. Crisp, precise, loaded with citations from local zoning laws, HOA bylaw limitations, and a polite but unmistakable warning. Cease and desist or face legal consequences. I didn't send it right away. Instead, I spent the next few days doing my own digging, talking to neighbors, reviewing old letters. What I found painted a picture even more disturbing than I expected. Karen had pulled this stunt before, tried to rope in edge properties under the guise of community expansion. She'd find residents for mailbox colors, window treatments, even lawn chairs, all without a vote. And people let her get away with it, out of fear, out of exhaustion. But now she had gone too far. And this time, she'd picked the wrong house. I waited until the timing was just right. Midweek, late afternoon, the kind of quiet when people are home from work, watering their lawns, waving to neighbors. Visibility matters when you're pulling the pin on a bomb, especially a legal one. I printed 5 copies of Mason's letter, one for each member of the HOA board, including Karen. But I didn't leave it in their mailboxes or slip it under their doors. I hand-delivered them. I started with the more reasonable members, Linda, Tom, and Grant. I watched each of them read the opening paragraph, their expressions shifting from curiosity to discomfort to dawning realization. "This is serious," Tom said, looking up at me. "Is this true?" Karen never mentioned a jurisdiction issue. "She wouldn't," I replied, "but the law doesn't care how persuasive her clipboard is." Then came Karen. She opened the door, saw the envelope, and immediately scowled. "What now?" she snapped. "Just returning the favor," I said, handing her the letter. "Figured you won't be informed. Since you know, I'm allegedly your newest voluntary member." Her eyes flicked across the first few lines. I could see the blood drain from her face in slow motion. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. "You can't threaten me with legal action just because you don't like the rules." I tilted my head. "Karen, they're not the rules. They're your rules. And they're illegal." She tried to slam the door in my face, but I was already walking away. Back home, I waited, not for her, but for the ripple, and it came fast. By the end of the day, I had 3 voicemails from board members, not from Karen, from the others. Apologies, clarifications, promises to review the charter, promises to look into potential procedural errors. The next morning, Linda stopped by with a folder full of old emails, memos, and board communications. "You didn't hear this from me," she whispered, "but Karen's been rewriting HOA guidelines and distributing them without votes. She even forged signatures for a few of them." It was more than I expected, and exactly what I needed. I spent that evening organizing the files, comparing her memos with official versions, cross-referencing board meeting notes with resident complaints. The paper trail was long, sloppy, and damning. Karen had built her entire power structure on assumption, on nobody checking the fine print. Well, I had checked, and now I was holding the match. The HOA board meeting that evening was standing room only. Word had spread like wildfire, something about new evidence, something about property lines. But what really drew people in was the scent of change. You could feel it in the air. Karen was already seated when I walked in, center of the table, shoulders back, clipboard front and center like a courtroom gavel. She tried to meet my eyes with her usual smug defiance, but I could see the strain behind her smile. She knew this wasn't going to be like the others. The meeting kicked off in the usual way: roll call, old business, routine chatter about lawn maintenance and garbage schedules. Then came the real agenda: boundary review and jurisdictional clarification. Karen cleared her throat. "As many of you know," she began, her voice dripping with forced calm, "the board recently voted to extend community oversight to include select properties that were previously misclassified. This initiative was done in the interest of maintaining continuity and neighborhood pride." She glanced my way, the smugness creeping back in. "While one resident has raised concerns, I'd like to clarify that the decision was made legally and in good faith." I stood. "Karen," I said evenly, "there's just one problem with that." She blinked. "Oh, your decision wasn't legal, and I have the evidence to prove it." I turned to the rest of the board and laid the folder on the table. Thick, heavy, it landed with a thud loud enough to quiet the room. "This," I said, "is a full record of missteps, forged documents, unauthorized fines, property overreach, and a vote that never had quorum, executed without due process and outside of your authority." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Karen's smile froze. "I've included zoning maps, state codes, and verified communications between board members. I've also provided evidence of her personal attempts to rewrite bylaws, file false jurisdiction claims, and mislead this community." Her voice was tight when she finally spoke. "That's quite a dramatic presentation. But I'm sure the board will see this for what it is: A misunderstanding. No, Karen. I said this was a power grab. And now that it's public, you don't get to control the narrative. Tom, one of the board members, glanced at the documents. His brow furrowed. We weren't aware of half of this, he admitted. Some of these amendments. Karen, did you authorize these without a vote? She opened her mouth, then shut it again. Another board member, Linda, turned to her sharply. And the map? The boundary changes. Karen's voice cracked. I acted in the best interest of the community. But not with the community's consent, I added. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was decisive. The board called a recess, without Karen. They took the folder. They closed the door. And when they reopened it 30 minutes later, everything had changed. When the board returned from recess, Karen looked like she'd aged 10 years in 30 minutes. Gone was the upright posture, the poised authority. She sat stiffly, lips pressed into a tight line, hands clenched in her lap. Her clipboard, her ever-present symbol of control, now rested untouched on the table like a discarded relic. Tom cleared his throat. After reviewing the document provided in light of several concerning discrepancies, the board has decided to issue an immediate suspension of all recent jurisdictional expansions, specifically those lacking proper quorum, procedural documentation, or community consent. He didn't look at Karen when he said it. Linda spoke next, gently but firmly. We're also launching a full review of administrative actions taken over the past year, and we'll be contacting legal counsel to assist with the process. You could have heard a pin drop. Karen stared ahead, unmoving. It was the first time I'd seen her at a complete loss for words. And then came the final blow. Effective immediately, Tom said, Karen will be stepping down as HOA president. We've agreed it's in the best interest of transparency and community trust. The room didn't erupt in applause. This wasn't a movie. It was quieter than that, more powerful. Heads nodded, shoulders loosened. People finally exhaled, like they'd been holding their breath for months. Karen stood, her face unreadable, and quietly collected her clipboard. She didn't look at me, didn't look at anyone. She walked out of that room with her back straight, but her silence was louder than any exit speech. Afterward, neighbors approached me. People I'd never spoken to beyond a casual wave at the mailbox. Thank you for standing up to her. I thought I was the only one she'd targeted. She tried to find me for having wind chimes. One man, eyes glassy with relief, said quietly, I was going to sell my house just to get away from her. Not anymore. Karen's empire hadn't collapsed in flames. It had eroded piece by piece until the foundation gave way, not with a bang, but with the unmistakable shift of power returning to the people she'd ruled over. By the time I got home, a new letter had been slipped under my door. This one was from the board, the new board. It acknowledged that my home was never, at any time, under HOA jurisdiction. It apologized for the harassment, the false notices, and the unwanted attention, and it thanked me for helping them course correct. I pinned it to my fridge, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that even the loudest tyrants can be silenced if you're willing to speak louder. In the weeks that followed, Highland View felt lighter. It wasn't dramatic, no parades or banners, no big declarations, but you could feel in the way people lingered longer at the mailbox, in the porch lights that stayed on later, in the neighbors who finally smiled without glancing over their shoulders first. Karen didn't disappear completely. She still lived in the neighborhood, still took her walks, but something had changed. The clipboard was gone. The confident stride had softened into a cautious shuffle. She kept her head down now, avoided eye contact, and when she did look up, it was with the tired eyes of someone who had tasted power and lost it. She tried to claw her way back once or twice, circulating petitions, suggesting a consulting role with the board, even hosting a few unofficial community coffee chats at her home. But without her title, without her grip on the bylaws, Karen was just another resident. Most people ignored her. A few diehards stuck by her side, but they were few and getting fewer. The rest of us, we moved on. The new board, headed by Linda, who'd proven to be both fair and no-nonsense, made quick work of restoring trust. They hosted open meetings. shared transparent minutes. Even asked for community input, not just tolerance. The change wasn't just in policy, it was in spirit. Holiday decorations bloomed across lawns without reprimand. Kids laughed again in the streets without fear of HOA notes about sidewalk chalk or bike tires touching grass. One family threw a block party. No fines, no warnings. Just food, lights, and music echoing through a street that had finally found its voice again. As for me, I kept to my routine. Porch at sunset, cold drink in hand, watching the neighborhood slowly stitch itself back together. One evening, a neighbor I barely knew stopped by. He stood at the edge of my walkway and offered a simple nod. "Appreciate what you did," he said quietly. "Didn't think anyone could take her down. Thought we'd just have to live with it." I smiled. No one should have to live under someone else's clipboard. He chuckled. "Amen to that." And just like that, he was gone. Back to his porch. Back to his peace. Karen had tried to make my home her battleground. She tried to turn neighbors into subjects. Tried to twist guidelines into laws, and laws into levers of control. But in the end, all she had was a clipboard and a fantasy. And when the neighborhood stood up, the fantasy fell apart. Now, as the sun dips behind the rooftops and laughter drifts on the breeze, I sit back and smile, not because I won, but because we all did. Because finally, after months of noise, fear, and false power, the neighborhood is what was always meant to be. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to stand up to a Karen in your life, remember, sometimes the loudest voices just need someone to speak louder.